The round aimed at Lieutenant Commander Hayes barely missed his skull by 3 inches. The sharp crack of the bullet cutting through air came so near that he felt the pressure shift against his face before his brain registered the sound. Another shot followed, this one striking the rock he ducked behind, sending sharp stone pieces flying across his bare arm. The SEAL team found themselves trapped in thick Pacific Northwest woods, facing enemies who weren't supposed to be there. Caught in a fight that should never have started, and the only person capable of rescuing them was the intelligence analyst they'd all written off as useless, right until she yanked a Barrett M82 from her bag and transformed everything. Before we reveal exactly what unfolded during those 18 minutes that completely changed what people thought was possible, leave a comment telling us your location in the world. What you're about to see isn't simply a tale of expert shooting. It's about the instant when a group of America's finest fighters discovered that sometimes the most lethal person present is the one everyone's been ignoring. Now let's dive in. The landing had gone perfectly, too perfectly. Looking back, the helicopter had lowered them at the target zone just past midnight. Rotor blades slicing through mist so heavy it felt like swimming through clouds. Staff Sergeant Eliza Cooper had stepped out last, her boots touching moss-covered earth without making a sound. She'd shifted the pack on her back, heavier than normal equipment, heavier than anyone had noticed, and joined the line without speaking. The mission description had been clear. Intelligence pointed to a homegrown extremist group hiding in the Cascade Mountains, gathering weapons and planning strikes on government buildings. The SEALs were sent to find them, watch them, and if needed stop the danger before it could spread. Cooper's job was purely watching and analyzing, spotting faces and confirming identities. She wasn't meant to fight. That was 4 hours earlier. Now, as morning light broke through tall Douglas firs and massive red cedars, things had gotten far worse than anyone expected. The extremist group wasn't just armed. They were skilled, organized, and they'd been ready. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hayes guided his 8-person team through land that should have given them perfect protection. Heavy bushes, natural barriers, limited views that favored close fighting where SEALs dominated. But somewhere between the drop zone and their destination, they'd been seen, or perhaps betrayed before they'd even loaded the helicopter. Either way, the enemy had prepared a trap, and Hayes had led his team straight into it. The first warning arrived when Petty Officer Chen, walking ahead, raised his closed fist. The line stopped instantly. Through the morning fog, movement. Not animals, people, and they were advancing with military precision, surrounding them. Weapons ready. Hayes pressed his radio button. Possible contact. Hold your fire. Then the woods exploded. Machine gun fire ripped through the trees from 3 sides at once. Tree bark burst apart as bullets climbed the trunks. Leaves and branches shattered in the deadly storm. The SEALs split up, diving behind whatever natural shelter they could reach, shooting back with controlled bursts that showed years of practice. But they were outnumbered and cornered. The enemy had picked their ground wisely, creating overlapping kill zones that turned the forest into a death trap. Every time a SEAL tried to advance, gunfire drove them back to hiding. They weren't moving forward, they weren't falling back. Cooper had dropped behind a huge fallen cedar, her rifle raised and searching for targets. But unlike the others, she wasn't shooting back. She was studying, counting gun flashes, tracking firing rhythms, building a mental picture of enemy locations with the kind of focused accuracy that comes from training most people never get. Cooper, start shooting. That was Petty Officer Reeves yelling from behind a boulder 15 meters away. She didn't listen. Something mattered more than adding her rifle to the defense. She needed to see the entire battlefield, grasp the shape of the trap surrounding them. Only then could she discover how to escape it. Hayes's voice came through the team radio, steady despite the madness. All units, we're caught in a planned ambush. Enemy controls the high ground north and east. We need to break away and pull back to the backup meeting spot. But when Chen tried to shift position, a spray of bullets nearly ended him. The enemy didn't want them leaving. This wasn't just harassment, this was total destruction. They're running suppression teams, Cooper announced, her voice cutting through the radio noise with surprising strength. 3-person groups. 1 pins you down while 2 circle around. They're trying to get behind us from the west. How can you tell? Hayes asked, firing toward a tree where he'd spotted movement. Because that's exactly what I'd do. Her voice stayed calm. No feelings, just battlefield math delivered with total confidence. More gunfire. This time Petty Officer Morrison caught a hit. The bullet punched his armor plate and knocked him backward. The ceramic stopped most of it, but he was down, gasping, possibly with cracked ribs or worse. Everything was falling apart. Hayes understood it. His team understood it. They had maybe minutes before the enemy finished surrounding them, and crushed the SEAL position from every direction. Close combat in dense woods with an enemy who knew the terrain. That was a slaughter nobody survives. That's when Cooper acted. She rolled away from the fallen cedar, staying low, crawling through ferns and brush back toward their starting rally point. The rest of the team was too occupied fighting to see her leave. She reached their stored gear, heavy packs, spare bullets, special tools, and dragged her own pack close. The zipper was military grade, built to open quietly. She worked it loose and pulled out something that made the morning light seem brighter, a Barrett M82 sniper rifle. The weapon was enormous, 29 pounds empty, 4 feet long, built for a round originally meant for destroying engines and punching through light armor. It wasn't standard equipment for intelligence analysts. It wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her possession, but there it sat, dark black and lethal, with an advanced scope mounted on top and a silencer that added another 14 inches to the already massive length. She put it together with movements showing thousands of practice runs, legs deployed, magazine loaded, bolt pulled with exact mechanical rhythm. The weapon came alive in her grip, transforming from pieces into a tool of pure death. Through the trees the fight continued, but Cooper had already shifted mentally beyond it. She was figuring angles, judging distances, reading the wind through the way it moved the treetops. The woods were thick, but 50 caliber rounds didn't worry about plants. At the speeds the Barrett created, small branches and leaves meant nothing. Only solid tree trunks mattered, and Cooper's brain was already plotting paths that threaded between them. She moved again, this time toward a small hill that gave her height and clear views into enemy locations. The Barrett's weight should have slowed her down, made her clumsy. Instead, she glided through the undergrowth like wind, finding a natural shooting spot between two moss-covered rocks that hid her while giving stable support. The scope rose. Through the lens, the battlefield became crystal sharp. Enemy positions invisible to bare eyes now stood out clearly. Gun flashes, heat marks, the slight shifts of hidden fighters who believed they were safe. Cooper's breathing slowed, became measured and controlled. Her heartbeat dropped through focused mental effort, biofeedback training kicking in automatically. The Barrett's crosshairs settled on the first target, a fighter hiding behind a thick fir tree, using the trunk as cover while directing fire at Hayes's spot. The man felt secure. The tree was probably 2 feet across, solid wood that would stop any normal rifle round. But the Barrett wasn't normal, and Cooper wasn't shooting at the tree. She was shooting through it. The science was straightforward if you understood bullets. A 50 BMG round flying at 2,800 feet per second, with 13,000 foot-pounds of power didn't stop when it hit wood. It went through, creating a devastating wound channel in solid timber that destroyed anything on the far side. Cooper's finger reached the trigger. The Barrett's release was crisp, predictable. She squeezed through it with the kind of smoothness that comes from muscle memory, carved deep through endless repetition. The rifle thundered. Even silenced, the 50 caliber boom was huge. A noise like heaven's hammer hitting steel. The kickback was serious, but Cooper had prepared for it, her body taking the force through correct positioning and body mechanics. Downrange, the result was instant and brutal. The round struck the fir tree, drove through 2 feet of solid wood, and came out the other side with enough remaining force to find the man hiding behind it. He dropped without warning, without sound, killed by a bullet that had passed through supposedly solid protection like tissue paper. The other enemy fighters couldn't understand what had just occurred. They saw their teammate fall, but the shooting direction seemed wrong. The angle didn't make sense. They were still looking for threats along their established lines when Cooper's second shot connected. This target had positioned himself in a rocky hole, thinking the natural fortress made him safe. Cooper sent a round through the narrow space between two boulders at an angle requiring exact math to calculate. The bullet threaded through impossible space and found flesh with crushing effect. 2 down. 16 seconds between shots. The SEALs were still fighting, still pinned, still unaware that everything had fundamentally shifted. But Hayes, with the gut feeling of someone who'd survived multiple war zones, sensed something had changed. The enemy fire pattern had altered, become less organized. Panic was bleeding into what had been disciplined military action. Cooper worked steadily through her priority list. A machine gunner who'd been keeping Reeves pinned down, 1 round through the weapon itself, wrecking the mechanism and sending metal fragments back into the shooter. A team leader directing movement by radio, 1 round that ended the conversation forever. An enemy sniper positioned high in a pine tree, thinking height and concealment made him unreachable. 1 round that proved him completely wrong. 5 targets, 90 seconds. The Barrett's magazine carried 10 rounds. She was halfway done and the enemy was starting to lose control. They'd been attacking, Now they were under fire and they couldn't figure out where the danger was coming from. The Barrett's sound echoed through the woods, bouncing off trees and ground, making direction impossible to determine. Reeves was the first SEAL to grasp what was happening. He'd seen enough war to recognize the unique sound of a .50 caliber rifle, and he knew nobody on their team should have one. He risked a look toward where Cooper had been positioned and saw emptiness. Then he searched higher, toward the rise, and caught a flash of movement between the rocks. "Holy hell," he whispered. "Cooper's shooting." Hayes didn't have time to think about that. An enemy group was still trying to complete their surrounding move. 3 fighters advancing through dead ground that would put them behind the SEAL. He raised his rifle to engage, but the angle was terrible, and they were using cover well. Then one of the flanking fighters simply collapsed, like someone had cut the strings holding him up. A second later, the distinctive boom of the Barrett rolled through the forest. The other 2 fighters froze, uncertain whether to advance, retreat, or find better cover. Their pause destroyed them. Cooper's next 2 rounds found both men with surgical accuracy, threading between trees at angles that shouldn't have existed. 8 targets eliminated, 4 minutes passed. The enemy's organized structure was crumbling. What had been a planned ambush was breaking into scattered individuals trying to live. Some tried to fall back, retreating through the forest toward backup position. Others buried themselves behind whatever cover existed, hoping to survive the invisible force systematically destroying their unit. Cooper tracked the fleeing fighters through her scope. Long-range targets now 800 meters and farther, moving through dense forest where normal thinking said accurate fire couldn't happen. She adjusted for wind, for height, for the angle of their movement, for how bullets would bounce off branches and brush. The Barrett spoke again and again. Each boom was followed by a distant fall, a life ended by math and skill, and a weapon system that turned impossible shots into certainty. 10 targets, 12 minutes. Chen, the team's medic, was treating Morrison, stabilizing his wounds while the battle raged near, but he couldn't stop watching the forest, seeing enemy positions that had been pouring deadly fire at them suddenly go quiet one after another, falling to an invisible killer who struck with machine-like efficiency. "Who is that?" Chen asked, his voice carrying real wonder. "Who the hell is shooting?" Hayes had worked it out. He was watching through his rifle scope, tracking the paths, working backward from where enemy fighters were falling to figure out the shooting location. It kept pointing to the same spot, that rocky hill where Cooper had vanished. "It's the analyst," he said, and his voice mixed disbelief with respect. "It's Cooper." The enemy was finished. Those who could escape were doing so, falling back through the forest in messy groups that looked nothing like the disciplined tactical force that had ambushed the SEAL. Those who couldn't run had given up or were hiding, hoping to be missed. The firefight that had threatened to destroy Hayes's team had lasted 18 minutes. From first shot to last, Cooper's action had taken exactly 12 of those minutes. 10 confirmed kills, each one a target removed with accuracy that redefined what the SEALs thought was possible in thick forest conditions. She secured the Barrett, broke it down with the same mechanical skill she'd used to build it, and returned to the team's location as if nothing special had happened. By the time she emerged from the trees, the weapon was tucked in its case, hidden in her pack, invisible again. The SEALs stared at her like she'd materialized from another world. Hayes was the first to speak. "Coop." He stopped, searching for how to express questions that didn't seem to have proper words. "What the hell was that?" She adjusted her pack, her face as blank as if she'd just returned from an equipment run rather than single-handedly breaking an ambush. "That was 10 hostile targets eliminated at distances between 300 and 900 meters in a blocked area with limited visibility and major plant interference." "You're an intelligence analyst," Reeves said, still trying to match what he'd seen with what he'd been told about their team makeup. "I'm also a graduate of the Special Operations Target Elimination course," Cooper answered. 3 years with Joint Special Operations Command, 47 confirmed kills across 17 combat deployments. "They moved me to intelligence work 6 months ago." After she stopped, seemed to reconsider what she was about to reveal. "After my last mission." Hayes studied her with the kind of focus he usually saved for enemy combatants. He was seeing her differently now, spotting signs he should have caught earlier. How she moved through terrain with perfect efficiency. How she'd positioned herself during the initial movement with views and firing zones already calculated. The fact that her pack had been 20 pounds heavier than standard and nobody had questioned it. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. "Because you didn't need to know," she said simply. "My job was intelligence work. Observation. Analysis. Unless circumstances demanded additional skills." "And when did you decide circumstances demanded your additional skills?" Cooper looked at him with eyes that had witnessed too much violence to pretend otherwise. "When Petty Officer Morrison took a round and you were roughly 4 minutes from being surrounded and killed." She said it without theater, just tactical evaluation delivered with clinical accuracy. At that moment, success required action with skills beyond what your team currently had available. Chen had finished stabilizing Morrison and was checking the rest of the team for wounds. They'd been fortunate. Morrison's broken ribs were the worst damage. In any other situation, trapped by a well-planned ambush in terrain favoring the enemy, deaths should have been masked. But Cooper's action had changed those numbers, rewritten the expected result through precise use of overwhelming power. "The Barrett," Hayes said. "That's not approved equipment for intelligence personnel. It's not banned either," Cooper replied with the smallest hint of a smile. "The equipment approval forms for special operations personnel list mission-critical gear, as determined by operational needs. I determined it was mission-critical. Did you know we were walking into an ambush?" That was Reeves, still processing the speed and accuracy with which she'd dismantled the enemy force. Cooper shook her head. No solid intelligence suggested prepared enemy positions, but the tactical situation suggested backup planning was smart. Dense forest, limited escape options, homegrown extremist group with unknown training and equipment. The risk calculation favored bringing extra capabilities. She pulled out her tablet, displaying satellite images of the area they'd been working in. The enemy positions were well built, pre-positioned fighting holes, coordinated firing zones, radio communication between groups. This wasn't random, they knew we were coming. That sent ice through the team. Betrayed operations meant leaks, security breaks, problems extending far beyond a single firefight in the Pacific Northwest. Hayes pressed his radio, switching to the command channel. "We encountered organized resistance at primary target. Enemy force showed advanced knowledge of our arrival. Request immediate pickup and security review of mission planning." The response came within seconds. The helicopter was already coming, redirected from standby. They had 20 minutes to reach the pickup point. The team formed up. Morrison supported between Chen and another operator. They moved through the forest differently now, with Cooper positioned where she could provide cover. The Barrett reachable within seconds if needed. The dynamic had shifted. She wasn't baggage anymore. She was the person you wanted between you and whatever dangers the forest might still hide. They reached the pickup point without more fighting. The enemy had withdrawn completely, unwilling to risk another battle against an opponent who could reach out and kill them from impossible distances through cover they thought was solid. The helicopters dropped into the clearing, rotors whipping undergrowth into spinning patterns. The team loaded fast, professional despite their exhaustion, and Cooper was last aboard, settling into a seat near the door where she could maintain awareness. As the helicopter lifted away from the forest floor, Hayes moved to sit across from her. The noise of the rotors made private talk impossible, but he didn't need words. He reached out his hand. Cooper looked at it for a moment, then accepted the handshake. It wasn't just acknowledgement. It was recognition, the kind that warriors give to other warriors when words can't express respect earned through combat. The flight back to base took 40 minutes. Most of the team slept, bodies demanding rest after the stress dump of sustained fighting. But Hayes stayed awake, watching Cooper with the kind of thoughtful focus that came from rethinking everything he thought he understood. She'd saved their lives, not by being in the right place at the right time, but through deliberate preparation and skills that exceeded anything they'd been briefed to expect. She'd walked into a death trap with them, recognized the danger, deployed equipment she wasn't supposed to have, and performed a rescue with accuracy that most snipers couldn't match from prepared positions with perfect views, and she'd done it like it was normal. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. Cooper's report was thorough, clinical, detailed. She described each shot with mathematical accuracy, distance, wind, angle, target evaluation, effect on target. The intelligence officers analyzing her report kept pausing, asking her to repeat details, struggling to match what she was describing with what they understood about long-range accurate fire in dense forest settings. "You're saying you made a 900-meter shot through plants with a target that was moving." The intelligence officer looked at her like she'd claimed to have flown to the target without a helicopter. "The target was moving at roughly 3 miles per hour on a predictable path," Cooper clarified. "I figured his position 2 seconds ahead of where he was and placed the round where he would be, accounting for bullet travel time and deflection from plants in between. The 50 BMG kept enough energy to defeat light obstacles and still achieve deadly effect on target." Hayes watched this exchange with grim satisfaction. His team had nearly died because someone in the planning chain had underestimated both the enemy and the abilities of the asset they had assigned to his team. But that asset had saved them anyway, despite being deliberately positioned where she couldn't contribute to the fight. After the debriefing, he found Cooper in the weapons room, cleaning the Barrett with the kind of careful accuracy she applied to everything. The weapon was taken apart, each piece receiving individual attention. "They're going to want to take that away from you," Hayes said, nodding toward the rifle. "They can try." Cooper didn't look up from her work. "But the moment they issue orders limiting my equipment choices, I'll submit transfer papers. There are other units that understand the value of planning for skills beyond the minimum requirement. Special operations or private sector pays better, and they don't worry about paperwork as much." She assembled the rifle with smooth skill, then broke it down again, running through the sequence one more time. "But I'd rather stay where the mission matters." Hayes sat down across from her, watching the ritual of maintenance that every warrior recognized. "Tell me about your last mission, the one that got you moved to intelligence." Cooper's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work. "Target elimination, high-value individual in hostile territory. Everything went according to plan right until it didn't. My spotter took a round. I had to carry him 4 kilometers through hostile territory while fighting multiple enemy groups. We both made it out, but she stopped, weighing how much to reveal. The evaluation was that I'd shown poor judgment by fighting instead of escaping. That I'd put my partner over mission completion. You saved his life." "I did, but the mission target escaped and it took another 6 months to find and stop him. Command decided that made me better suited for intelligence work than field operations. Lower confidence in my decision-making ability." Hayes understood what she wasn't saying. Some desk worker had decided that Cooper's loyalty to her partner was a weakness rather than a strength. That her willingness to fight her way out rather than abandon a wounded teammate suggested she couldn't be trusted to make cold calculations when missions required them. It was exactly the kind of thinking that destroyed good operators. "For what it's worth," Hayes said, "you made the right call today, and if you want a recommendation for transfer back to Special Operations or any other unit, you've got it. Nobody on my team will ever forget that you walked into hell to pull us out." Cooper finished reassembling the Barrett and secured it in its case. "Appreciate that, Commander, but I'm not ready to go back yet. There's something satisfying about intelligence work, seeing the bigger picture, understanding how all the pieces connect. Maybe I needed the break from pulling triggers. Until today, she agreed. But that was different. That was necessary. There's a difference between choosing to be a warrior and recognizing when the situation demands it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two professionals who understood the weight of violence and the cost of capability. "The team's hitting the bar tonight," Hayes said finally. "Unofficial, off base, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions about why military personnel need to drink heavily on a Wednesday night. You should come." Cooper smiled, the first genuine expression of emotion Hayes had seen from her. "Will there be questions about where I learned to Probably. Can you handle drunk SEALs being impressed? I've handled worse." The bar was exactly what Hayes had described. A dive establishment that had been serving military personnel since before most of the current team had been born. Dark wood, dim lighting, a jukebox playing rock music from past decades. The kind of place where you could drink in peace, and nobody judged you for ordering whiskey at 3 in the afternoon. The SEALs had claimed a corner booth, spreading out with the casual authority of people who'd earned the right to take up space. They were on their 3rd round when Cooper arrived, dressed in civilian clothes that made her look even less like the combat operator she'd revealed herself to be. A cheer went up when they saw her. Not mocking, not sarcastic, genuine celebration. Reeves waved her over, sliding down to make room. Someone put a whiskey in front of her before she'd even sat down. To Cooper, Chen raised his glass. The analyst who forgot to analyze and just started shooting instead. The glasses clinked together. Cooper sipped her whiskey, accepting the tribute with quiet grace. "Serious question," Morrison said. His ribs were wrapped tight, but he'd refused to stay in medical. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" "Because I've worked with some of the best long gun operators in the Navy, and what you did today, that was different." Cooper considered her answer carefully. "I had a teacher, former Marine Scout sniper who'd moved to contract work. He believed that accurate shooting was as much art as science, and that the weapon was just a tool. The real capability was in understanding physics, reading environmental conditions, and making calculations faster than conscious thought. And he taught you to shoot through trees." Reeves looked doubtful. "He taught me that obstacles are relative. A .50 caliber round has so much kinetic energy that materials most people consider solid barriers are actually just temporary blocks. The key is understanding material density, calculating energy retention, and accepting that some shots will fail. But if you understand the physics well enough, more shots will work than people think is possible." Hayes leaned back, studying her with an expression that was part respect, part calculation. "How many confirmed kills do you actually have?" 47 before today, 57 now. She said it without pride or shame, just across multiple locations. Afghanistan, Syria, several places that don't officially exist in public record. Average engagement distance was 700 meters. Longest shot was 1,400 meters in mountain conditions, with 30-knot crosswinds. The SEALs processed this in silence. They'd been working under the assumption that Cooper was support staff, someone to carry equipment and take notes while the real warriors did the real work. Finding out she'd been killing enemy combatants at ranges where most shooters couldn't even see targets, that required a complete rethinking of who she was and what she represented. Why the hell did they pull you out of the field? That was Chen expressing what everyone was thinking. Cooper's expression darkened slightly. Because I made a choice. My spotter was hit, bleeding out, and the mission called for me to hold position and complete the objective. But if I'd done that, he would have died. So I broke off, fought multiple enemy groups during extraction, carried him 4 kilometers to a pickup point, and called in emergency medical evacuation. He lived. The high-value target escaped and killed 17 more people before we could find him again. Jesus Christ, Reeves. And they punished you for that? They said I'd shown poor judgment, that mission success should always override individual survival, that my emotional attachment to my spotter had damaged my operational effectiveness. She took another sip of whiskey. Maybe they were right. Maybe 17 people died because I chose to save one. Bull Hayes's voice was flat. Definitive. You made the call any decent human being would make. The fact that command doesn't understand that says more about them than it does about you. The conversation shifted to other topics. War stories, close calls, the particular challenges of operating in different environments. But the underlying current had changed. Cooper wasn't the outsider anymore. She was one of them, accepted through the oldest military ritual, shared combat and mutual respect. As the evening wore on and the whiskey continued to flow, Morrison leaned close to Cooper, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. Thank you for earlier. I know I was hit and probably would have survived either way, but he struggled with the words. You changed the outcome. You saved my life and everyone else's. That matters. Cooper met his eyes, seeing the genuine gratitude there. You're welcome, but that's the job. We look after each other. That's the only thing that matters when everything else goes to hell. The team drank late into the night, cementing bonds forged in violence and confirmed through survival. When Cooper finally left, walking back toward base housing in the cool evening air, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. She felt like she belonged. The official report concluded that the enemy group had been disrupted through coordinated tactical action by a Navy SEAL team operating in difficult terrain. Cooper's contribution was mentioned in the classified section. 10 confirmed enemy casualty attributed to long-range accurate fire that had broken the ambush and enabled the SEAL element to survive. But there was no mention of the Barrett, no reference to skills that exceeded her official role. The weapons she'd carried weren't listed in the equipment record, and nobody seemed interested in asking questions that might demand uncomfortable answers. Sometimes the military was content to accept positive outcomes without demanding explanations that might create administrative complications. 6 weeks later, Cooper received new orders, transferred to a joint task force that specialized in high-risk personnel recovery operations. The posting required skills in intelligence analysis, tactical planning, and accurate shooting. It was exactly the kind of assignment that recognized all her capabilities rather than forcing her to operate at a fraction of her potential. The orders included a personal note from Hayes. Told you I'd get you back in the field. Welcome to the team. She packed her gear, including the Barrett, which still wasn't officially approved but also wasn't officially banned, and prepared to move to her new assignment. As she secured the rifle in its case, she ran her hand along the cold metal, feeling the weight of the weapon that had saved lives and taken them. Some people were built for violence, not because they loved it, but because they understood it, because they'd trained until skill became instinct, until calculations happened faster than thought, until the weapon became an extension of will, rather than a separate tool. Eliza Cooper was one of those people. And now, finally, she was going somewhere that understood what that meant. The SEALs never forgot what happened in that forest. Chen kept detailed notes about her shooting positions, studying the angles and trying to duplicate her bullet calculation. Morrison recovered fully, and he made sure to tell anyone who would listen about the analyst who'd saved his life with shots that shouldn't have been possible. Reeves started carrying extra ammunition for 50 caliber weapons on missions, just in case Cooper showed up again and needed support. And Hayes, he made it his personal mission to ensure that anytime a team needed someone who could turn impossible situations around through precise use of overwhelming force, Eliza Cooper's name came up in the planning discussion, because sometimes the most important person on a mission isn't the team leader or the point person, or the communications specialist. Sometimes it's the quiet professional in the back who's carrying capabilities nobody expects, expertise nobody appreciates, right until the moment everything goes to hell and she turns out to be the only thing standing between survival and disaster. In a world where appearances matter more than capability, where credentials carry more weight than competence, it's easy to overlook the people who've earned their place through fire and blood and countless hours of training in conditions most people can't imagine. But smart leaders remember one critical lesson: never underestimate the person who seems content to observe, because sometimes they're not learning your job. They're deciding whether you're worth saving when the situation requires someone to step up and change the outcome through capability that exceeds every expectation. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. It watches, it waits, and when the moment requires it, it acts with accuracy that redefines what everyone thought was possible. Eliza Cooper understood that lesson better than most. And somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, in a forest that would always remember the day a SEAL team should have died but didn't, the trees still carried the scars of rounds that had traveled impossible distances and achieved impossible results. 10 targets, 12 minutes, 57 confirmed kills and counting. Some warriors fight from the front, loud and obvious, and impossible to miss. Others operate from positions where nobody expects them, changing outcomes through capability that exists specifically, because most people never see it coming. Both types are necessary. Both types are lethal, but only one type gets consistently underestimated right until the moment they prove that appearances have nothing to do with capability. And quiet professionals are often the most dangerous people in any room. Thanks for watching. Every woman has a story worth telling.